It said for avid gardeners that the Mother's Day, or I'm sorry, not the Mother's Day weekend, the Victoria Day weekend is the time to start putting objects into the garden. Now there was a woman who had a great deal of attention she put into her garden. And she also had a lilac bush around and also 8 boys. Now she was living in behind a number of apartment buildings and condos. Unfortunately, she took such pride in her garden and her lilacs that others didn't feel the same affinity, and therefore kind of threw garbage indiscriminately in the area, and therefore all this garbage landed in the garden and in the lilac bushes. So her sons were very, very perturbed and said, okay, we're going to take care of business here. We're going to let them know not to do this anymore. And many people would be like these sons, wanting to seek revenge in some kind of violent manner. Or some people may start complaining, call 311, call the police, or even go onto Facebook and begin a big rant. However, this mother had another way of addressing this issue. So she told her boys to go to the lilac bush, cut off some of the lilacs, and give it to the 12 houses and condos and apartments around their house. And she said, okay boys, take these lilacs, go over there and say, you know, my mother thought that you might want to have this. She was thinking of you when she wanted to give you a gift. Miraculously after that, there was no more garbage thrown in and around the garden. So a miracle happened. And so this woman displayed the virtue of magnanimity. She was very magnanimous in trying to seek the best for other people, a win-win. And likewise with us, when we're magnanimous like God, miracles happen. And of course this woman sought another way to address the issue in a very positive way. Now someone who is magnanimous is someone who is literally a great soul, or has greatness of soul. That's what the word means in Latin. Magna means great, and animus means soul. Someone who's magnanimous is a great soul. Someone who's very noble, who kind of sees the big picture, wants to see a win-win in all situations versus what's in it for me. The opposite of being magnanimous is being mediocre. So we're all called to greatness. And the only one who can really demonstrate the greatness of soul is Jesus himself. And that's what we have both in our second reading from the first letter of John, also our gospel, talking about abiding in the love of God, because this is the source of all things. So what happens when people encounter God's love? I think there's no more vivid illustration of the impact of accepting God's love than Acts of the Apostles. Acts of the Apostles, of course, the period of time after Jesus ascends into heaven, until about the year 60, just before St. Paul is martyred. And this whole stretch is how the church had to adapt to the crises and problems they faced and do it magnanimously. And I think to appreciate Acts of the Apostles is what happened to the Apostles before Jesus' ascension into heaven. And of course we have a wonderful illustration of that in the Gospels. We see that the apostles are perplexed by this Jesus figure. They don't understand him. Particularly in St. Mark's Gospel, we have the apostles who are depressed, who after Jesus, it says, resurrected, they hide themselves in the upper room. They deny Jesus, they abandon Jesus, and they despair of what they've done to Jesus. So how can anything good come out of that? Well, again, the perfect illustration of what happens when people accept God's love and are transformed by that are these same apostles, because once they receive the Holy Spirit, holy smoke, can they ever do remarkable things? Because they've encountered the remarkable, merciful love of God, their lives are transformed, their old ways are done, and now they can think with a bigger picture. A case in point was last week's Gospel, or last week's passage we read, Acts chapter 9. What to do with Paul. You know that Paul is this great enemy of the church, and the church saying, we don't want anything to do with this guy. This guy's crazy. He's going to harm us. And yet Barnabas is the one who takes St. Paul by the hand and brings him to the apostles to vouch and say, yeah, he's a good guy. He's going to be okay. And Paul does remarkable things in that midst. And so he's magnanimous, Barnabas is. Another wonderful example of someone who is very magnanimous is St. Peter. Now in this passage from chapter 10 of Acts of the Apostles, begins with St. Peter on the top of his house, and he's dreaming, he's hungry. And all of a sudden he has these images of unclean foods according to the Jewish dietary laws. And the Holy Spirit says to him, eat them. Peter says, no, I can't eat them. In the meanwhile, we encounter Cornelius, who's in a town called Caesarea. And so he is told by the angel of the Lord to go and see Peter. Now Peter lives in Joppa, which is 63 kilometers away. Immediately that Cornelius sends his men to go and see Peter. And so they arrive there the day after. So they walk 63 kilometers. That's about 12 hours worth of walking to go and see Peter. Now again, getting back to Peter, he's hungry, he's having this vision. He says, this is not right, this is not the way it's supposed to be. And then a day later, he gets a knock on the door from Cornelius' friend saying, hey, we want to talk with you about coming to visit us in Caesarea. Now Peter is not magnanimous. He's saying, no, this is impossible. This is the way it's supposed to be. I'm a good Jewish boy, and we're supposed to eat like this, and we're not supposed to deal with the Gentiles. We're only supposed to deal with people of the Jewish faith. But because Peter has encountered the love of God in a profound way, that this is the guy who denied Jesus 3 times, this is the guy who couldn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, the Messiah. And here is transformed, open-minded now, to then to say, okay, I'm going to go back to Caesarea with you, travel 63 kilometers, and then to join Cornelius the next day. And so what happens the next day? Well, we just heard it in our passage from Acts of the Apostles, that they have experienced an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, another Pentecost. And Peter's saying, this is not supposed to be the way it's supposed to happen. How can this happen? But Peter accepts it, and then he says, how can we prevent these people from being baptized? And so they are accepted in the family of God. And so Peter could only do this miracle, and to have encountered, to say yes, to go from Joppa to travel up to Caesarea so quickly, because he's encountered the love of God, the magnanimous love of God, the merciful love of God. And in turn, he is also magnanimous. He is also generous, and he is also merciful. So miracles happen when we are magnanimous with God. And if we look into the woman by this beautiful garden and the lilac bushes, or even St. Peter, how easy it is to encounter changes in life and to be rigid or to be blocked. See, this is the only way it's supposed to be. And I think for truly to be open to God, God is a God of surprises and true miracles, if we remain open to them. So how do we open ourselves to the greatness of our destiny, the greatness of our souls, to be magnanimous like God? I think if we have to truly encounter the love of God, if we have been transformed by the love of God, despite what we've done, then we in turn can be magnanimous individuals. So if we root out the idea of revenge, or grudges, or laziness, or the perception of being frustrated, thinking this is the only way that things can be in my own narrow world, if we truly open ourselves to the life of God, the Spirit, the challenge that come with life, God will do remarkable things. But we can only be magnanimous if we encounter the love of God. And that's why we come here every weekend, to celebrate the remarkable love of God, His resurrection ultimately. So by encountering the resurrection at this Mass, we are like the apostles, who before the resurrection were kind of dull and ordinary and very rigid, and afterwards, boy, they were open to the greatness of God and to share that with others. And so we encounter that in His Word and in His body and blood. And so this week we will encounter challenges. I mean, all of us will encounter problems. No one has a monopoly on misery. But people always have choices to demonstrate mercy. And so if we think about the challenges we will have to overcome this week, let's be magnanimous like Peter and like this mother. She had a beautiful garden, beautiful lilac bushes, full of trash. Is there a way that I can be more open-minded? I can think win-win? And she did. So she made a point of cutting out the lilacs and giving it to all the neighbors. And there was no more garbage because they respected what she did, her magnanimous gesture. And this week, miracles will happen if we are magnanimous like God.